The Eagles made a signing today. They released a longtime favorite, and a special player is signing away from Philadelphia. It's the effects of the Super Bowl, Pete Thompson. So a couple in, couple out. We'll break it all down. Johnny Mack is with us now on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Well, this time tomorrow, everything's official. Well, today it's kind of official, right?
Yeah, kind of official. You knew today was going to be kind of crazy after there wasn't much happening on the first day of legal tampering. So kind of a flood of news today. And you're right, everything can't become official till 4 o'clock tomorrow. But the die is cast for Brent Celek, unfortunately, as the longest tenured athlete in Philadelphia. I think that's the big news today, and the fact the Eagles restructured Lane Johnson. So those two moves basically got Howie Roseman $12.5 million, gets the Eagles at least under the salary cap for now.
Let's start with Lane Johnson. That was really the first move this morning. What was Howie able to do here to get Lane Johnson under? I mean, he had just signed a new deal recently with a lot of salary. It sounds like that Lane was willing to really help the team out here. And you wonder why more contracts aren't constructed like this by the teams. I guess the players don't like them like this so much, but Lane was willing to help out.
Well, I think part of it, he's a little bit in a different category because of the suspension, which kind of nullified some of his guaranteed money, and it turned into sort of salary that he could earn if he continued to play. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit different than the average contract. But from his standpoint, it's an easy decision because he's getting the same money. It's just fully guaranteed. So it's not that big of an issue for him. And from Howie's, it's one of those accounting tricks that he's become famous for, and just moves it in a different way. The exact same number counts differently under the salary cap. And as I said, from that standpoint, he gained $7.5 million.
So Lane Johnson basically restructures the deal. That saved him, about $7.9 million. So they started off the day pretty good. They then cleared out more money a little bit later on in the day by releasing Brent Celek, is there a shot that they bring him back, or do you think they shook hands and said, thank you for your service?
I think they shook hands and said thank you for their service. If you looked at the Eagles' statement, if you looked at even some players, Lane Johnson among them, Jason Peters, basically saying goodbye to Brent on social media, it's pretty clear they're not thinking about bringing him back. If they were, they just would have restructured the deal at a lower number. They wouldn't have gone through this. So pretty evident that he's out the door, and that's unfortunate, but that's one of those things Howie Roseman has talked about. You can't bring everybody back. And Brent's one of those guys that people have a lot of fondness for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, his number, his age, declining player, it's just one of those things. That's the NFL.
Yeah, and
talked about a statement, John. I just want to jump in real quick before I forget, and the difference in the Eagles now and that statement where they closed by saying, we are forced in this business, we're forced to make difficult decisions, especially this time of the year. This one is as tough as they come, but in our eyes, Brent will always be an Eagle. That's the kind of thing, had they said something like that when Brian Dawkins left, maybe the fan base wouldn't have gotten so fired up, right? I mean, at least they've learned something about releasing a popular player.
Well, you can say that, or you can say, hey, they won the Super Bowl, so they can get away with a lot more stuff now, as opposed if they won one when Brian was here. I don't think people would have had the same. But I get what you're saying, and there is a classy way to do it. And anytime, as I said, not only the longest tenured Eagle, but also the longest tenured Philadelphia athlete. I mean, he's been around this city for a very long time. He's been a good representation of the organization, not only on the field, but off the field. So all those things we've talked about. The Eagles, if you think about it, going back to Jordan Matthews and John Dorbas and now Brent Celek and all these good players they've lost that are considered good locker room guys. Trey Burton's in that category as well. You would think at some point that would start to accumulate, but it really hasn't. And that, from my standpoint at least, is a little bit of a surprise.
So Trey Burton, another name that's out there, but the Eagles are then adding names too, and we see a discussion about Corey Nelson. Now, what can you tell us about Corey Nelson and the linebacker that they look to be interested in to bring in?
Well, yeah, he's going to come in at under a one-year deal as sort of that third linebacker. We always talk about people look at them as starters, but they're not really starters anymore. He's going to fill that third linebacker role, and he's also, I think, more importantly, a very good special teams player. And I wrote about that last week on 973ESPN.com, that the Eagles are going to focus on certain players like that because they felt they took a little dip in special teams play last year, and they were going to try to focus on guys that could help them. Corey's one of those guys.
So it doesn't necessarily mean like Nigel Bradham's out of here. It covers a couple different bases.
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, I think there's two ways that this can go. Nigel's out of here or Michael Kendricks is out of here. They can't keep them both. And the reality is Michael's under contract, so it's tougher to spin him off for a trade or that nature. I've said from the start, I think the Eagles would prefer to have Nigel Bradham. Can't have them both. Need one of them. And the reality is because one is a free agent, one is not, it's more likely than that Michael stays. But there is at least the potential, as long as we go through this process and he's not signed yet, that the Eagles could spin off Michael Kendricks in a trade, re-sign Nigel Bradham, and Nelson would remain that third linebacker. Either way, he's going to be the third linebacker. But they need one of those guys, either Bradham or Kendricks.
And the way the chronology of the day went, since we're on the defensive side of the ball, at about 11 o'clock, the first tweet came out that they're going to pick up a veteran run stuffer. Tell us about how Joe Douglas's Baltimore connection comes through again.
Yeah, Haloti Ngata at some point, as it stands right now, this is this was the best defensive line in football last year. And they added Michael Bennett and Haloti Ngata already to that group. Now, I don't think everybody's going to be back. It's evident Bo Allen is out the door. He's already said goodbye to Philadelphia on social media. Hasn't signed yet, but there's a lot of interest in him around the league. So he'll be gone, and Ngata kind of slides into that role as the third defensive tackle. But this is, he's older, obviously. But as a two-down player, he's still very effective. This is a 5-time Pro Bowl player, a 2-time All-Pro, added to this embarrassment of talent this team has on the defensive line. It is almost unbelievable.
So he basically replaces Bo Allen, or essentially, right?
Right, and Bo Allen's tweeted out, "Goodbye, Philly," or "Thanks for the good times, Philly."
Yeah. Right now he figures as that third defensive tackle in the rotation. Little bit of a different player. This guy's a traditional nose tackle, just one of the best run stoppers in football. So
right.
He's a two-down guy.
I was going to say, I remember him more in the 3-4 in Baltimore than he was a 4-3 guy in Detroit the last couple of years, right?
Yeah. And that is kind of those old sort of delineation lines of 3-4 versus 4-3 don't mean as much in today's NFL as they once did, because most teams that play a 4-3 use a nose tackle anyway, and what's called an under tackle plays 3 technique. So he's a nose tackle. In a weird way, he's a better player than Bo Allen. He's a bigger guy. He's a stronger guy, even at his age. But in a weird way, I don't think he fits in as well, because he is just a nose tackle. And I think Bo, the most impressive part of him last year, because he was brought in as a nose tackle in the 3-4 under Chip Kelly and Billy Davis, but he proved to be more versatile than anybody thought. and the fact that he could play in 4-3, move back and forth from different techniques. I don't think Ngata is as versatile. Better player, but not as versatile.
Yeah, because this is a guy who Super Bowl was a dominant player in the league, right? I mean, a dominant player for his position.
Early in his career, he was a star. He's not that now, obviously, but he's still very good. As I said, he's a two-down run stuffer, and I think this more has to do with Tim Jernigan now. Has got to become a little bit more sort of the versatile guy and move back and forth and play occasionally some three technique instead of just playing on the nose or playing one technique. So I think he's the guy who's got to become a little bit more versatile, because that's just not what Ngata can do, and certainly not at this stage of his career.
And they're high on Jernigan, or else they wouldn't have extended him, right, John?
Yeah, he's a very good player, very good fit. Sort of tailed off at the end of last season, but he was injured. He was playing hurt. Had a bit of a nagging ankle injury, and then you remember he's one of the guys who had the flu leading up to the Super Bowl. But yeah, the Eagles think a lot of him, as well they should, and that's why they extended him.
Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Oh, yeah, Floria moves out of the Eagles today. So I said to Mike before we got into your segment, still haven't heard anything about Patrick Robinson. Do you think we'll hear something about him, John?
Well, you had that report that the Eagles were expecting to re-sign him before the tampering period started. That never happened. Certainly they've been working to re-sign him. They want him back, but now there's other teams that can talk to him. Minnesota, one of them. He had the big six against the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. They want to upgrade their nickelback slot. It's dangerous. Guys are out there, and you don't have a ton of cap space, and other teams do. There's always an opportunity you're going to get outbid. From Patrick's standpoint, I'm not as concerned as much, because he clearly wants to stay here. He's clearly very comfortable in this defense, very comfortable in the position he plays, and he's also very good friends with Malcolm Jenkins. So I don't think he wants to leave, but it does cause a little bit of concern that he's out there.
We'll also take a look at some of the, Trey Burton is another guy who we talked a little bit about.
Throughout the first pitch today at the Philly spring training game, that was kind of his goodbye to Philadelphia.
4 years, though, $32 million. So they lose Burton and they lose Celek on the same day. So do they have tight end depth that's on the practice squad, or do you think tight end is an area in free agency or the draft that they're going to start zeroing in on?
No, they have to take a tight end in the draft at some point. I don't think there's any question. We'll see if they can bring in a lesser name tight end that maybe they think has some potential, similar to what they did at linebacker with Nelson. But right now, after today, I mean, they are very shaky behind Zach Ertz as far as depth goes, and the fact that both Burton and Celek are gone. Billy Brown is the one guy they think very highly of him as a receiver, but remember, he was a wide receiver in college at Shepherd, a small school, just a king-size wide receiver. So he can't block. He's just a receiver. They desperately need a blocking tight end somewhere.
They also, you look at Burton, who was a very good pass-catching player when Ertz was out.
And by the way, they're not going to get Jimmy Graham. It looks like I just saw a tweet that said the Packers intend to sign Jimmy Graham to a 3-year deal. That's coming through.
Jimmy Graham playing with Aaron Rodgers could be quite interesting. We'll get into that in a minute. But when Burton replaced Ertz in the starting lineup, they didn't dip in the pass-catching. That's a big spot. I know you can't assume that Ertz is going to get hurt all the time, but when he was hurt, you didn't lose much with Burton in that spot. So filling that second pass-catching tight end is pretty big too.
No, it is, and that's where I think Billy Brown could potentially fit, and he would offer a little bit of a different player. As I said, he's much bigger as far as taller, rangier than Trey Burton. So he could potentially become one of those. You just talked about Jimmy Graham. I'm not trying to compare them. That might be the best in football in the red zone. But he's got that kind of frame where maybe he could develop into a red zone threat or something of that nature. And because he used to play receiver, really stretch things down the seam. But that's kind of what you're hoping for, and you're crossing your fingers. You can't count on it. But at least to have some options as far as receiving tight end. They don't have any options at blocking tight end, inline tight end. They have Adam Zaruba, the former rugby player. That's it.
Gotcha.
And he's barely played football. So they need to bring in somebody who can block for this offense, and they know that, and they will.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. Let's look at the NFL news and notes here. Sam Bradford does it again. $20 million. He'll be the Cardinals.
Unbelievable.
I told you. I've been saying he is not going to sign to be a backup someplace. And quite frankly, when he's healthy, he doesn't need to be a backup someplace. And other teams, I guess.
No.
You say it only takes one, but it's not just one with this guy. It's now 4 with this guy.
Well, I say this. I didn't think, the main concern with Sam this time was obviously the injuries, and the Vikings finally came out and admitted he had a degenerative knee issue that's going to be a problem from this point forward. I think everybody knew that, but it's the first time it was put on record. So not only did he get a starting job, but he got a raise. It is amazing what this league thinks about the arm talent of Sam Bradford. And by the way, they're not necessarily wrong, as you mentioned, Mike. When he is healthy, when he is out there, when he is clean, there are very few people on the planet that can throw the football like Sam Bradford. But that's a lot of ifs. And to pay this guy $20 million now, you can get out of it after 1 year. But it truly is amazing after all that's gone on with St. Louis and Philadelphia and Minnesota. And there he is again, getting another check for $20 million.
Now, John, before we move on from Bradford, do you think any of his former teams think they really got a good return on investment? I mean, other than the Eagles, and that was because of what he brought back in the trade.
No, I mean, yeah, I think they all do. If you talk to the Eagles today, they still love him. And they're not lying. If you talk to the Vikings, they love him. And they're not lying. He really is a talented player. I know people don't want to hear it. I've said on this show, and I get constantly killed, he has more value than Nick Foles. People don't understand it. He's as far as arm talent, they think tremendously highly. And by they, I'm talking about NFL personnel people. The only issue with Sam Bradford, only issue there's ever been with Sam Bradford, is the injuries. And they're significant. But people are always, as I said, there aren't, obviously, if you lose out on Kirk Cousins, and Arizona was in that category, you have to go to Plan B. And for them, Plan B, the best option was taking a guy who can throw the football the best. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's what this league thinks Sam Bradford is. And that's tremendous. A tremendous passer.
Replacing Sam Bradford in Minnesota is going to be Kirk Cousins, and he's got a pretty interesting contract, John.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised, to tell you the truth. And we'll wait and see. It's just reports at this stage, but he's going to get a 3-year fully guaranteed contract. And I got in the Twitter trying to explain to people fully guaranteed is generally redundant, but you have to say it in the NFL because there's a difference between guaranteed money and fully guaranteed money. And Kirk is the first guy who's gotten 3 years where every single penny is guaranteed no matter what. And that's probably a bad precedent for the rest of this league. But it tells you the Vikings are going all in, and they think they're very close to being a Super Bowl team. They are obviously close. They made it to the NFC Championship game. I don't know if this gets them over the hump, but they clearly think this is the final piece.
We shall see. 3 years, $85 million guaranteed, which is kind of unheard of in the NFL, right?
First one ever, yeah. And As I said, a number of the other teams will look at it as a bad precedent. I think it's a little bit overrated because there's not like a lot of guys who have that kind of leverage. It's not like people are going to go into other GMs' offices tomorrow and say, hey, I need 3 years fully guaranteed like Kirk Cousins. It just doesn't work that way. First of all, you have to play that position. You have to be the right age. You have to be an ascending player. And very rarely do quarterbacks like that get to the open market. Only because of Washington's bungling did this happen. So I don't think it's going to be happening all the time, but it is a precedent, and it is the first one.
Johnny Mack, you got to love a day where 9 of the 10 names that are on the left side trending on Twitter for me right now are all NFL names. If Rex Tillerson didn't go get himself fired, I would have been a nice 10 for 10.
Yeah, Rex Tillerson's a free agent. That's a big one.
There you go. That's also to be discussed. I mean, Danny Amendola's in my timeline there. Jimmy Graham, who I just talked about. Teddy Bridgewater, there's another quarterback trying to find a new home.
Yeah, and how rare do you see a team that makes the NFC Championship game loses 3 quarterbacks in one day and signs a quarterback for $28 million a year? And by the way, 2 teams offered Kirk Cousins more than the Vikings. That would be Arizona and the New York Jets. So it's not like he was just going to the highest bidder. He went to the what he thinks is the best opportunity to win.
By the way, Danny Amendola is heading from New England to Miami, so you got that. You've also got Paul Richardson, the wide receiver from Seattle, gets $40 million to head to Washington to play with the Redskins. You've also got Drew Brees heading back to the Saints, Marquise Lee going back to the Jaguars. The Jaguars also got the top offensive guard on the market, highest paid guard ever, right, John?
Yep, highest paid guard ever, and somewhere Zach Martin is smiling because he's next up and he's going to get an extension. And first thing he says is, I want $1 more than Andrew Norwell. We start there. So anytime, same thing with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. Aaron Rodgers is smiling because he's up for an extension. So he'll start at $28 million in $1 when he looks for his extension.
All right, NFL free agency opens tomorrow at 4 o'clock. John McMullen will have all eyes and ears at JF McMullen on Twitter. Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys.